Smug, greedy, well-fed white people have invented a language to conceal their sins. It's as simple as that. The CIA doesn't kill anybody anymore. They neutralize people. Or they depopulate the area. The government doesn't lie. It engages in disinformation. The Pentagon actually measures nuclear radiation in something they call sunshine units. Israeli murderers are called commandos. Arab commandos are called terrorists. Contra killers are called freedom fighters. Well, if crime fighters fight crime and firefighters fight fire, what do freedom fighters fight? They never mention that part of it to us, do they? Never mention that part of it.
Welcome to The Independent Review, a weekly podcast where we bring you the latest from the world of independent journalism. Whether you're a news junkie, a curious learner, or just looking for a fresh perspective away from the corporate media, this is the show for you. So join us now as we dive into the world of independent journalism on The Independent Review.
Welcome to another episode of The Independent Review. Today's show includes clips from James Corbett, the Hindi News Network, Free Thought Project, and Johnny Vedmore. Let's jump to our first clip with James Corbett from the Corbett Report.
Welcome back, friends. Welcome back to another edition of Questions for Corbett. I'm your host, James Corbett of CorbettReport.com. It is July of 2023, and for this edition of the Questions for Corbett series, we're going to take a question from a recent comment on CorbettReport.com, specifically a comment to my recent editorial on Sanctions Are War by Other Means that was posted up to the website in May. And if you haven't read it yet, I suggest you do. I think it is a particularly important editorial with some important information. But just to go through it here, for the purposes of today, it starts by noting that nearly 1/3 of the planet is under economic sanctions of one sort or another. Did you know that? Probably not, but why not? Even those who don't pay much attention to the nexus between geopolitics and economics are likely to find that to be a shocking statistic. But for those who do pay attention to that nexus, it's even more shocking, because they know that economic sanctions are not just some abstract economic concept. And so the purpose of this editorial is to go through and basically highlight what I assert here in the title, that sanctions are war by other means. So if you scroll down, you find existing users login. Is this a paywall? You shill. Corbett, I always knew there was something wrong with you trying to earn money from your living. The terror. Oh, wait. Click here to access the editorial for free. Oh, whew, okay. Well, anyway, so if you don't want to pay me for my work, well, anyway, you can enjoy it for free. You're welcome. And so when you click through to the Substack link, you can go and read through this article where I go through a few documented cases from history, highlighting the fact that sanctions are indeed war by other means. I talk about the German starvation blockade post-World War I. Post-World War I? When did World War I really end? These are questions that were raised in my conversation with Jerry Docherty, obviously one half of the writing team behind Hidden History and Prolonging the Agony, that you will recall from my World War I documentary. But I do go through in more detail here about this particularly important part of the post-quote-unquote World War I era, and how the German starvation blockade that was brutally inflicted upon Germany by Churchill and others after World War I absolutely contributed to the death of many, many Germans long after the armistice was signed. So anyway, that is one example. I also go through the Japanese oil embargo, as in the U.S. embargo of oil to Japan pre-World War II, or pre-American involvement in World War II anyway, which was one of the items suggested in a infamous memo penned by McCollum, Lieutenant Commander Arthur H. McCollum, the head of the Far East Desk of the U.S. Office of Naval Intelligence, which included various ways of provoking Japan into striking the U.S. to make it look like they are the aggressors. Well, how do you provoke someone into starting a war? Well, let's basically wage war by other means. So the oil embargo was imposed, and you can find out more information about that before of course, the strike at Pearl Harbor, which FDR and Churchill absolutely knew about, as I'm sure you know if you were in this audience. And I also look at the Iraq child-killing sanctions, the sanctions that took place there in Iraq in the 1990s that were absolutely contributory to the death of hundreds of thousands of innocent children. And grown adults as well, for whoever is keeping track at home. Anyway, lots of information on that, and many, many links to go through besides. And then at the end, I talk about that surprising statistic. 1/3 of the entire world is currently under sanctions. Did you know that? What does that mean? And so I talk about some of those sanctions and where this comes from. An article penned recently on the human consequences of economic sanctions by Francisco Rodriguez that explains what shouldn't need to be explained, but does so from an academic and economic point of view, specifically outlining not only the fact that, of course, sanctions are a form of economic warfare, but also that they specifically hurt the most vulnerable in society and have remarkably little effect in the way that they're always implemented is as a stern and rebuke against a dictator or authoritarian in some other country, when in fact they are usually targeted at the most vulnerable in that country. Whether sanctions hurt regular people in the target countries is a hotly debated topic, but it shouldn't be. The evidence from almost all critical examinations of economic sanctions show that they are very damaging and sometimes lethal for people who happen to be living in any of the many and growing number of countries subject to such measures by the US, the EU, or other powerful actors. I suggest you do read that article. I think it is an important one and worth reading. But anyway, that is the quick overview of this article. And as I say in the article, of course, the three examples, the historical examples I look at, are just historical examples, and you could think of many, many, many more, and I do invite people out there who do have other examples to leave information about that in the comments. But speaking of the comments, that's where we derive the titular title of this Questions for Corbett, where if you scroll down to Hyper Simeon's comment, Hyper Simeon wrote, "How is not wanting to do business with someone an act of war? It's not." All right, well, okay, so that does raise the question, because of course this is called Sanctions Are War by Other Means. Hyper Simeon is asserting that how is not wanting to do business with someone an act of war? It's not. Well, that's an interesting way of framing the question, isn't it? Sanctions are not wanting to do business with someone? Who is not wanting, and who is wanting? And in what way is this not wanting imposed or not? This is a back and forth that develops between some commenters, and then Hyper Simeon clarifies that my response is to the Japanese oil embargo. We don't want to support war by giving Japan oil, so they attack because we provoke them. I don't see it. As my various headphones and things start falling to the ground here. I don't see it like that. Yes, Japan was wrong for Pearl Harbor and whoever else knew, but the simple fact to not do business is an act of war is lunacy. I think I understand what this means. So the simply not doing business with someone and seeing that as an act of war is lunacy, even from a voluntarist view. More importantly, provide for your own nation, if anything. All right, so there's a couple of questions to tease out here, and that, as I say, the titular question of this particular Questions for Corbett, are sanctions war? Well, you know my answer is going to be yes, and I will talk about that more in a moment. But I think there's a second thread that's being woven here in the way that this is being posed by Hyper Simeon. So, the simple fact to not do business is an act of war is lunacy, even from a voluntarist view, more importantly. So, yes, as people may know, I do hew to a voluntarist ideology in which consenting adults can contract to engage in what transactions they want, or to not engage in whatever transactions that they don't want to engage in. That is, of course, their right, and nobody has the presumed authority to step in there and tell them what to do. But that's kind of the question here, right? How is not wanting to do business with someone an act of war? Okay, of course it is not. I agree 100%. Not wanting to do business with someone, that isn't an act of war. That is not something that should be in any way retaliated against, or as some first stage toward outright hostile hot war. But that's not what is going on here, quite obviously and quite specifically. For example, it's not that FDR decided he didn't want to personally send oil to Japan or sell oil to Japan. No. FDR is signing an order which applies to all American businesses. Every single person, all of these businessmen suddenly are at the subject to the will of FDR and or his government. That isn't voluntarism. I hope people understand the point here. It isn't a subtle point, and it's not an unimportant or trivial point. It actually goes to the very heart of the matter that we deal with on a whole range of issues, not just this issue, but this issue too. The point is not someone deciding, I don't want to buy from this company, or I don't want to sell to those people. That's, as I say, that's perfectly within any person's prerogative to make that decision for themselves, and nobody, in my opinion, nobody has the right or the authority to come in and to stop them from transacting with someone or to force them to transact with someone. But that's precisely what sanctions are. Sanctions are when a national government or some sort of supranational body like the WTO or whatever other presumed authority has the right to step in as a third party in a transaction to stop two parties from interacting or to force two parties to interact. No, that's ridiculous. So yes, sanctions are not people deciding they don't want to do business with someone. Sanctions are someone else deciding that you can't do business with someone because they have decided you can't do that. So please don't make that mistake. And as I say, this is an incredibly foundationally important idea if you want to understand what the voluntarist ideology even is or what it's about. And it has to do with so many of the problems that we face. Just for example, hey, how about the rise of the biosecurity state? As I have been at pains to point out since the very beginning of this fake, phony, generated crisis in my very first videos about this, go back to what no one is saying about the coronavirus crisis or whatever that video was called. And my very message in there was that this is fundamentally about health freedom. Everyone has the right of their bodily autonomy to determine for themselves what medical precautions they will take based on their own perception of what risk is out there and what will mitigate that risk and what the trade-offs of those things are. Everyone has the right to decide for themselves, and that means you can decide to seal yourself hermetically in some completely sealed chamber for the rest of your life if you can afford to do so. Go for it. I'm not going to stop you, nor would I presume to have the authority to stop you from doing that. But likewise, reciprocally, I get to decide for myself what I believe the risks are and what I will do to mitigate those risks, and no one has the right to stop me from taking whatever precautions I want or forcing me to take whatever precautions they want me to take. That is the foundation of health security. That is the foundation of voluntarism as it applies in the health arena. And here in the economic arena, I get to decide who I'm going to trade with on whatever side of whatever imaginary line on a map you want to draw. And nobody has the right, the authority to step in and to stop me from transacting in that way or to force me to transact with someone else or whatever the case may be. So I hope people understand this. This is an absolutely foundationally important thing to understand if we're going to understand what voluntarism even is. So no, sanctions are not voluntarily deciding. People deciding they don't want to do business. I'm not going to sell oil to Japan. You can decide to do that, but you cannot decide to do that for someone else. That's the point. Okay, now as I say, the actual title of today's podcast, Are Sanctions War, is the sort of more direct question that's being asked here. And as you'll see if you go through and actually read this editorial, yes, I certainly do think that sanctions are warfare. And I think that is amply backed up from any number of examples that we could look at around the world today, yesterday, in the far distant past, or in the very near future.
There is significant evidence surveyed in the report that I just authored, as well as in other academic studies, that economic sanctions have an adverse effect, a major adverse effect on living conditions in target countries. Some of the studies find that the imposition of sanctions by the U.S. leads to a decline in income per capita of up to 26%. That's the equivalent of causing a Great Depression. Another study found increases or declines in life expectancy of between 1.2 and 1.4 years. That's the equivalent of the mortality effects of the COVID pandemic. So when sanctions are imposed on a country like Venezuela and like Cuba, they lead to a major economic contraction. In Venezuela, GDP per capita has fallen by 72%, and this has generated a massive exodus. Almost 25% of the population has left, and many of them are trying to make their way to the border and trying to enter the United States.
International sanctions and a freezing of the assets of Afghanistan's central bank make it near impossible for the economy to function normally. The country is run by an internationally recognized terrorist group, making its economy the victim of counter-terror restrictions. Those still with savings cannot access them, and sending money to the country from abroad remains tough. Added to this, food price rises are making it harder for families to buy enough.
Whatever you feel about the Syrian government, it's obviously, as you say in your report, it's 90% of Syria is living below the poverty line. And it's that 90% that is the worst impacted by these sanctions.
Unfortunately, that's the case. And if I may say like a last sentence, I see that the level of awareness about the impact of sanctions is enormously low. Lots of people believe that sanctions are not affecting regular people. They are only affected those directly designated. So I would really appreciate if people would start reading the reports which I produce. I do my best to verify all facts. And I need to say that in the situation of Syria, I didn't meet a single interlocutor who said that, no, we do not observe the impact of sanctions. They all sound in one voice, in unified voice, and they all said, please give us back the hope.
Economic sanctions were imposed upon Iraq, very tough ones, in the summer of 1990 when Iraq invaded Kuwait.
We have heard that 500,000 children have died. I mean, that's more children than died in Hiroshima. And you know, is the price worth it?
I think this is a very hard choice, but we think the price is worth it. It is a moral question, but the moral question is even a larger one. Don't we owe to the American people and to the American military and to the other countries in the region that this man not be a threat?
Now, sadly, I could go on and on and on and on, but I think you do get the point that, yes, sanctions are a form of economic warfare. They are economic weapons that are wielded against opponents. Whose opponents? In what way? Perhaps there are people in the audience who are not pacifists who think that, yes, sometimes there is the just war and it's a good idea to go in and guns blazing and to spill blood in the name of king and country. I don't know, whatever people use to justify that these days. At any rate, even if that is your mindset, still, economic sanctions are not just a form of warfare. They are a particularly pernicious, particularly disgusting form of warfare because they do not tend to hurt the supposed intended targets of this warfare. They tend to hurt the sickest, the most poor and vulnerable of society. Children, of course, often end up bearing the brunt of this particular weapon of warfare. And if the supposed goal is to overthrow a despotic regime, well, you know, whose despotic regime? Which despotic regime? On which day? Yes, we can point at many countries and tusk, but which countries are we not pointing to? Which countries are not being targeted with the economic warfare sanction weapon? Anyway, that being what it is, still, how many countries can you think of where successful regime change or whatever the goal supposedly was resulted as the consequence of the imposition of sanctions? I will hold my breath and wait for you to think of 2, 3 in the past century. I died because I can't hold my breath that long. This is the point. This is why Castro, for example, is chuckling from his grave over the idea that the mighty American empire could completely sanction and embargo Cuba for half a century, but didn't stop Castro. Actually, maybe his son is laughing about that in Ottawa right now. Anyway, that being what it is, yes, sanctions are warfare, and they certainly did impoverish, say, the people of Cuba, but not Castro. You can bet that he was living a pretty good life, right? So, I think the point is made, and as I say, I've only scraped the surface, so if there are people who would like to chime in with more examples, because there are many, many more that deserve to be looked at, and many more victims of this particular disgusting and cowardly form of warfare who need to be remembered, so that we do not repeat this in the future, and so that we understand the significance of that opening factoid. Hey, did you know that 1/3 of the entire globe is currently under some form of sanctions? What does that mean? And who is suffering as a result of that? Can you imagine if we didn't believe in the authority of some people wearing funny hats or wielding certain titles in some faraway capital to be able to tell vast swaths of the human population who they can and cannot interact with? Can you imagine if we could get out of that mindset? Anyway, I can imagine what that might be like, and I call it voluntarism. Anyway, I think the point is made, more or less. But if you would like more information on this, I will commend a podcast to your attention that certainly got me thinking along these lines earlier this year. It's the China Watch podcast, which had a 2-part series on the history and the current state of economic warfare by means of sanctions. And it goes through, in especially part 1, a lot of the history of how this developed, because it is important to understand that it is mostly 20th century development that economic warfare of this sort became the norm in international relations. It was not. Say, go back to the 19th century, and you will see Britain and Russia continuing to trade during the Crimean War and other such things that wouldn't make sense from today's viewpoint. What are they doing? No, this was something that developed historically throughout the 20th century and was identified and perhaps enabled by the League of Nations as l'arme économique. Anyway, there is a history here, and it is important to understand that so that we understand what is happening today and where we are being driven in the future as the result of sanctions that are being and will be imposed against the next boogeyman, China, North Korea, etc. And of course, which will primarily affect the poorest and most vulnerable in those societies and will not affect the Xi Jinpings or the Kim Jong-uns of the world. Anyway, there's a lot to be said on that, but I think I've said it for today. Of course, I will exhort you to go and read that original newsletter editorial that I wrote, and lots of links in there to lots of information on this, and I'm looking forward to hearing your other examples of warfare by means of sanctions. There are many, many to go through. And if you would like to support this work, then I would humbly suggest you do become a member of the Corbett Report, and you can log in and read that editorial directly on my website, along with the full newsletter with recommended reading, listening, and viewing, and a subscriber discount code for media, Corbett Report media, purchased on the New World Next Week store. But that being said, I think that's going to do it for today. I am James Corbett of CorbettReport.com. Thanking you for joining me for this edition of Questions for Corbett. I'm looking forward to talking to you again in the near future.
Now let's take a look at this clip from the Indie News Network regarding Elliot Abrams and more.
Is in news. What's up, everybody? It's me, Reef Breland, here with a different co-host this time. It's not Care Bear. It's a Yeti. It's a Yeti Jesus. What's up, Yeti? How you doing?
Too much, man. Doing a lot of gardening. Doing a lot of speaking out against wars and all that fun stuff. You know.
Yep. That's always good.
Lord Nelson. Sometimes I also report on the wars.
Oh, there's been too many to report. You know?
Yes.
So, but anyway, speaking of stuff to report on, you were on Misty's today, I think, right?
I was.
Should be able to check that out on TNT Radio. They should get it up either tomorrow or the next day. Normally they're pretty good about that. But
Yeah, they're pretty quick.
You know, got some people in the chat. Got Maleki's here. Got Angel here. Indy's here. The fams are showing up. Make sure you like and subscribe if you haven't already. Share the stream if you haven't done that as well. You know, we're shadow banned to all hell, so it's nice getting some support that way. But anyway, we brought some stories this week, Eddie. We got United Nations is warning to close Gitmo. I don't know if you saw that. We've got...
I did. Let's hope that happens.
Would be nice. Prigozhin's folly from Seymour Hersh, talking about the attempted coup. Is it even a coup? I feel like it's more like a mutiny at this point, but, you know.
Yeah. A lot of stuff was weird about that in general.
Yeah.
It just, yeah.
So, Biden rehiring a Trump cabinet member, Elliot Abrams, for head of diplomacy. So, we got a Caitlin Johnstone article about it. Should be good. And Mint Press, Kit Clarenberg, giving us the scoop on this supposed Chinese police department, which you'll find out is not actually Chinese, as usually these things go. So, anything you want to add before we get into it, Yeti?
No, I think we should get in on to the important discussions.
Yep, I'm down. So, Angel's asking, what is the United Nations actually going to do to close Gitmo? Not a damn thing. They are virtual signaling. We'll see. I'm sure it's strongly worded letters as always, because that's all we tend to get. But
they got their good pens out for writing that one.
Right. So Yumna Rivzi over at Truth Out, a new UN report condemns Guantanamo and calls on Biden to close it. The U.S. government is being given good counsel by the UN expert, and it's time the White House took it seriously. I'm going to tell you right now that's probably not going to happen. They tend to not take things seriously. Last week, Finolia New Owlane, I'm sure I butchered that name terribly, but the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Counterterrorism and Human Rights released a scathing report on her visit to the Guantanamo Bay detention camp. The report, the first of its kind, once again brought the world's attention to the profound, far-reaching impact that the use of torture and arbitrary detention by the United States has had not just on the minds and bodies of former and current detainees, but also on the victims and survivors of 9/11, their families, and families of detainees, because that's who's there. On the same day, President Joe Biden and Secretary of State Anthony Blinken marked the UN's International Day in support of victims of torture by releasing statements condemning torture and emphasizing the importance of upholding human rights and accountability, as the U.S. urges other countries to put an end to torture and provide redress to victims. The new UN report is a glaring reminder that the U.S. must meet its international obligations to do the same. The Biden admin is the first to allow a UN expert to visit Guantanamo, demonstrating commitment to its promise of closing Guantanamo and their international human rights. While it's a good first step, it's not enough, according to the Special Rapporteur. The current condition at the site, without doubt, amounts to ongoing, cruel, inhumane, and degrading treatment, and may also meet the legal threshold for torture. So this is the UN saying this, pretty much, which we know how they feel about torture.
May meet
yes.
the standard?
May.
Have they seen the pictures?
Yes. Or the musical that's based out of there.
No, I didn't know about that.
There is a Gitmo. There is a Gitmo musical, in case people are wondering. So the grim fact is that indefinite detention and systematic arbitrariness remain a reality at Guantanamo and beyond. The Bush's admin's choice to commit gross human rights violations and of successive administrations before to not reckon with the past has cast a long shadow, resulting in a situation where current and former detainees have been stripped of their most fundamental human rights and are forced to confront an ever-shifting and unpredictable reality that causes continued psychological harm. So the report by the UN Special Rapporteur provides a valuable roadmap for addressing the long-standing concerns surrounding Guantanamo and torture. It emphasizes the need for transparency, accountability, and adherence to international human rights standards, but more importantly calls for the closure of Guantanamo altogether. Today, a finite group of 30 detainees remain, 16 of whom are cleared for transfer. They must be transferred immediately, and the Biden administration must swiftly resolve the cases of those who remain in the failed military commission system. In his statement, Biden said, tortures destroy lives, families, and communities, and followed with examples of heinous methods of torture perpetrated by Russia and Syria. The sad truth is that until 14 years ago, when Barack Obama issued an executive order ending torture as interrogation method, Russian and Syrian could have been replaced with the U.S. throughout the statement, and it would remain factual. That is evident in the Special Rapporteur's report. From the torture methods she notes to the ongoing arbitrary detention and inhumane conditions imposed on detainees by the U.S. after 1911. So they're blaming Russia and Syria for torture on American soil. So that's nice.
Wait, how are Syrians torturing on American soil?
Well, he's just saying he's just doing whataboutism classically.
Oh,
right?
okay.
You know, he's just like, oh yeah, Russia and Syria, they torture, but you know, like we're kind of also. So,
yeah.
As the UN report notes, torture perpetrated by the U.S. in the name of victims of 9/11 was betrayal of the rights and as victims of terrorism. In fact, 9/11 families have been denied accountability and justice for their loss and suffering for more than 2 decades because of the role of torture in tainting the military commission tribunals at Guantanamo. As former Chief Defense Counsel Brig General John Baker said in a statement to the Senate Judiciary Committee almost 2 years ago, at the heart of the commission's problems is their original sin, torture. From the beginning, justice was an afterthought. So they're saying that even the families that are affected by this can't get justice because, you know, they tortured some folks, essentially. The ongoing failure to completely address that original sin has broken lives and devastated the families of both victims of terrorism and victims of torture. In 21, Biden said torture goes against everything we stand for as a nation, and we must never again resort to its use. Yet, the government's response to the Special Rapporteur blatantly disregards the reality, in particular, the long-documented deficiencies in medical care, which include broken and inadequate equipment, lack of medical staff, and medical histories devoid of past torture and trauma, among others. Earlier this year, 7 UN experts and the International Committee of the Red Cross also raised concerns about the systematic shortcomings in medical expertise, equipment, treatment, and accommodations at Gitmo. As a special rapporteur pointed out, access to counsel, communication with families, and standing operating procedures are also impacted by the arbitrary nature of the detention regime. Rather than acknowledging and addressing the gaps that exist, administration after administration continues to defend and sustain human rights violations. The U.S. government is being given good counsel by the UN expert, and it is past time that they begin to follow it. So, this rapporteur, Nee Aulain, also called on the U.S. to fulfill its obligations to investigate and prosecute allegations of torture, noting there is no statute of limitations for torture. Anyone who undertook it, facilitated it, legally authorized it, hid it, sustained it, remains liable for torture for the entirety of their lives. While most of us won't hold our breath that most responsible for torture will be prosecuted, the government can and must provide forms of redress immediately. The Biden admin didn't open Guantanamo, but it can close it. They must finish the job rather than continue to delay and continue to sustain the judgment and democracy of the world. The U.S. government owes a formal apology, reparations, support to the people who they tortured, as well as their families, and they must begin addressing the long-term impacts of these abuses. Hell, they're about to vote in someone who worked there. So, we'll see how that goes. But, closing thoughts, Yeti?
It's just... Let me collect my thought for a second.
Yep. Barack Obama didn't do a damn thing to close Gitmo.
Like it's just everything they always project is what they're doing.
Yeah.
Which leads me to believe that even the most heinous things they've accused others of, they must be doing themselves.
Yep.
Like the fact that Guantanamo Bay is still open, this whole UN thing is, as far as I'm concerned, it's probably just propaganda to make it look like they're doing something. Nothing's going to happen. Like, I fully think the rapporteur is just knowingly just spewing things to make it sound like she did her job.
Well, and she might be. She might be doing her job. And this is what happens when you do your job. Is that they don't listen to you, they ignore you. I mean, this has been clearly the case for that for a while now. I don't think. I mean, when was a few good men? Like 1980 something.
I was gonna say maybe 90s.
Right, and we knew of the problems that they had at that facility then. You know, so it's still that way. Nothing's changed. I think it's the fact that some people and government feel like that facility needs to exist for them to torture. That has to be the only reason they keep it.
Well, yeah, and it's also on Cuba territory.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure Cuba does not want them there.
No.
I can almost 100% guarantee that.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Like, I wonder if that's why the States is getting a little itchy with China and Russia potentially putting naval bases there now.
Yeah. I mean, that's partially why we still have Gitmo is because of that, I'm sure.
Mm-hmm.
And speaking, one of the reasons for that, we got this guy. Do you know about this guy? Elliot Abrams, you heard of him?
I know he's a warmonger and he's worked through a couple administrations.
Yeah, worked through, he was Trump guy, worked through Bush, I think, too.
Looks like the evil guy from the Raccoons show.
Sure. I mean, he definitely looks like one of those off-brand Bond villains, you know? Like that Kirkland Bond villain. So is this from Caitlin Johnstone? She writes that presidents keep hiring Elliot Abrams because the U.S. empire is just that evil. That feels like we knew that, Caitlin. So CNN reports that President Biden has nominated criminal neocon Elliot Abrams for a position to the United States Advisory Commission on Public Diplomacy. Right, so this is CNN reporting that Caitlin is addressing, which according to the U.S. State Department is responsible for appraising activities intended to understand, inform, and influence foreign publics, and pays acute attention to the U.S. government's official foreign propaganda arm, the U.S. Agency for Global Media. Okay, so that's who this guy's being appointed to, right? When you hear, usually when you hear someone called a neocon, it's not a strictly accurate description from a technical point of view, and it's frequently used to just mean warmonger, but Abrams is actually a proper PNAC neoconservative ideologue with deep ties to the old-school neocons of the 1970s and has helped promote violent U.S. imperialism in Latin America and the Middle East for decades. In addition to serving as the Trump administration's special representative for both Iran and Venezuela, two of the nations where Trump's foreign policy was at its most murderous, Abrams is probably best known for confessing to his role in the criminal cover-up of Iran-Contra during the Reagan administration. CNN, notoriously reluctant to criticize both U.S. foreign policy and Democratic presidential administrations, was surprisingly critical on this point in its report on Biden's nomination of Abrams to the position. Right? So here is CNN here. At Kala Walsh responding, Biden is nominating Elliot Abrams, a war criminal, even enough that even CNN points out his role in leading the Iran-Contra operation and supporting U.S.-backed genocidal massacres in Latin America. So here's CNN. Biden has announced its intention to nominate a former appointee under former President Donald Trump with a controversial past in Latin America to the bipartisan United States Advisory Commission on Public Diplomacy. Right? I love how they even whitewash that a bit. This is controversial past. You know?
Yeah.
So
controversial. Illegal murders.
Right. Yeah. They tortured some folks.
Yeah. Well,
so
they murdered some folks too.
Indy's saying PNAC is the project for New American Century. Cool. Good to know.
New American Century. I've not heard that before.
Yeah, it
What's
sounds
that
like a money laundering operation like most of these places.
I mean, that's the whole stock market.
So Elliot Abrams, who has served in 3 Republican administrations, most recently acted as the Trump admin special envoy to Iran and Venezuela, where he was tasked at the time with directing the campaign to replace Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. The Republican insider's long history in foreign policy is marked by a 1991 guilty plea for withholding information about the Iran-Contra affair that earned him 2 misdemeanor counts, 2 years probation, and 100 hours of community service. Through his crimes, were later pardoned by President George H.W. Bush. So, just a bit of revolving crime door. He does the crime, next guy pays him off, and then hires him again.
What? The Bush family's involved again.
Right? Darn. The secret Iran-Contra operation, which took place during Abrams' time as an assistant secretary of state in the Reagan administration, involved the funding of anti-communist rebels in Nicaragua using the proceeds from weapon sales to Iran, despite a congressional ban on such funding. That's that classic, we don't fund terrorists.
If communism is so horrible, why are we spending billions to fight it? Surely it would collapse on its own, right? Because
the Russians also fund pretty much. We gotta have someone to fight. God, how un-American of you.
We need someone.
In his role under former President Ronald Reagan, Abrams was also blasted by a Human Rights Watch report for an attempt in a February 1982 Senate testimony to downplay reports of the massacre of 1,000 people by U.S. trained and equipped military units in the Salvadoran town of El Mozote in December 1981, the largest mass killing in recent Latin American history. He insisted the numbers of reported victims were implausible and lavished praise on the military battalion behind the mass killings. Stances he doubled down on when he were put on display during a 2019 House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing by Rep. Ilhan Omar, a Minnesotan Democrat who used his history in Latin America to call into question his credibility. When you're so gross that even CNN is disgusted by you, you're a special kind of gross. So, do you want to see Ilhan Omar grill this guy? You down for that?
I'm down.
Okay. Let's do this, and crank the volume, and action.
Ms. Omar.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for your testimonies. Mr. Adams, in 1991, you pleaded guilty to 2 counts of withholding information from Congress regarding your involvement in the Iran-Contra affair, for which you were later pardoned by President George H.W. Bush. I fail to understand why members of this committee or the American people should find any testimony that you give today to be truthful.
If I can respond to that.
It wasn't a question. That was not a question. I reserve the right to my time.
It is not right.
That was not a question.
Committee can attack
on February 8th,
who is not permitted to reply.
That was not a question. Thank you for your participation. On February 8th, 1982, you testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee about U.S. policy in El Salvador. In that hearing, you dismissed as communist propaganda report about the massacre of El Mozote, in which more than 800 civilians, including children as young as 2 years old, were brutally murdered by U.S. trained troops. During that massacre, some of those troops bragged about raping a 12-year-old girl before they killed them. Girls before they killed them. You later said that the U.S. policy in El Salvador was a fabulous achievement. Yes or no, do you still think so?
From the day that President Duarte was elected in a free election to this day, El Salvador has been a democracy. That's a fabulous achievement.
Yes or no, do you think that massacre was a fabulous achievement that happened under our watch?
That is a ridiculous question, and I
yes or no?
No.
I will.
Sorry, Mr.
I will
Chairman,
take that as a yes.
I am not going to respond to that kind of personal attack, which is not a question.
Yes or no? Would you support an armed faction within Venezuela that engages in war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide, if you believe they were serving U.S. interest, as you did in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Nicaragua?
No, if she could just ask these for other countries that we send military aid to, that'd be great.
I am not going to respond to that question. I'm sorry. I don't think this entire line of questioning is meant to be real questions, and so I will not reply.
Whether you, under your watch, a genocide will take place, and you will look the other way because American interests were being upheld, is a fair question. Because the American people want to know that anytime we engage a country, that we think about what our actions could be and how we believe our values are being furthered. That is my question. Will you make sure that human rights are not violated and that we uphold international and human rights?
I suppose there is a question in there, and the answer is that the entire thrust of American policy in Venezuela is to support the Venezuelan people's effort to restore democracy to their country. That's our policy.
I don't think anybody disputes that. The question I had for you.
A lot of people dispute it, Ilhan.
Is that the interest, does the interest of the United States include protecting human rights and include protecting people against genocide?
That is always the position of the United States.
Thank you. I yield back my time.
Says through gritted teeth.
Which United States exactly?
Yeah, because that's not ours. Not ours. You got any more thoughts on this, Yeti? So far?
It's a travesty that these people can continually lie openly to government, to anything they want, and everything kind of backs them up continually, even though the vast majority of the world knows who the problem is.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
and they don't seem have any intent on stopping doing that, which is what's going to lead to the global war.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, the fact that what did he say at the end? That's always the case in America. We always take care of the human rights and, make sure that we don't have genocides. That's the, what? Like, who said? When? What brochure did you get? But
I mean, America watching safety is like a sex offender watching a kid.
Yeah, they create their own reality, says Indy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. It's whatever they say it was. So I got a bit more here. So As Forrest noted, this would be the fourth presidential administration that Abrams has been a part of, despite being a confessed crook and despite pushing for bloodshed at every opportunity in some of the U.S. empire's most notorious criminal actions. Abrams is such a cold-hearted killer that he openly admitted during a 1985 conference that the purpose of aiding the Contras in Nicaragua was to, quote, permit people who are fighting on our side to use more violence, end quote, and has promoted U.S. military violence against Iraq, Syria, and Iran with remarkable forcefulness throughout his career. The fact that someone so tyrannical, so corrupt, and so unscrupulous keeps getting appointed to positions involved with U.S. foreign policy tells you everything you need to know about the nature of U.S. foreign policy. It's actually a damning indictment of our entire civilization that swamp monsters like Elliot Abrams remain esteemed members of society instead of revealed outcasts who can't safely show their faces in public. They should be driven from every town they try to enter and unable to secure even entry-level jobs working for minimum wage, but instead they're employed as high-profile pundits, think tankers, and political officials providing expertise on some of the most consequential matters in the world. To paraphrase a quote often attributed to Jiddu Krishnamurti, it is no measure of health to be well rewarded in a profoundly sick society. Because our society is so profoundly sick, one of the fastest ways to fortune and esteem is to be as gross as Elliot Abrams. That's how messed up you have to be inside to rise to prominence within the U.S. power structure, willing to say and do whatever needs to be said and done in order to secure the continued dominance of the global empire that is sustained by human blood.
Next, let's take a look at this clip from the Free Thought Project on Forever Chemicals.
Because today I'm here with Matt, Gavin, and Don to talk about something else which is quite urgent that many people simply aren't aware of or just don't understand. So today we're going to be talking about various chemicals and pollutants in society that are causing a lot of health problems for both people and animals, and of course, the ecological damage that's happening on a massive scale. So we'll be discussing the PFASs, which is, one of the forever chemicals. We're going to be talking about microplastics, the atrazine, which is that same chemical that Alex Jones said was making the frogs gay, and he was right. He was right. Gavin will be talking about some of that, and we'll also be talking about fluoride and getting into its detrimental effects and the ongoing cover-up that has been exposed by journalist Derek Brose, which we've been covering here at the Free Thought Project. And we've also been covering fluoride news for about 10 years now. So Matt's going to touch on that a bit today. And Don will be talking about microplastics. So the idea for this episode came to me after I did an interview yesterday where I discussed my research on forever chemicals like the PFASs. So I'm going to be going over that much about what I found in this podcast as well. But we're basically here to raise the red flag, sound the alarm, and hopefully by the end of the podcast, we're going to give you some important knowledge about what's going on around you, but also some solutions, because that's also very important about how to avoid some of these nasty, dangerous, and harmful chemicals. So if you guys don't mind, I suppose I could go first, sharing my research, seeing I've already been blabbing this much already, and then I could pass it off to Matt. Maybe then Don or Gavin could go after that, or maybe just we'll have Gavin at the end because his research is just so extensive. I don't know how it's really gonna all work out. So let's get into the PFASs, which what is a forever chemical? So the PFAS stands for polyfluoroalkyl, which is a class of roughly 15,000 synthetic chemicals used for different purposes. If you think about products that have like a resistance to water, stain, oil, or heat, those are going to be generally products that have the PFASs in it. These PFASs, they contaminate soils and waterways. They've been found in the blood of people and animals, and have harmful health effects such as cancer, thyroid disease, kidney dysfunction, and congenital disabilities. And they're called forever chemicals because they don't break down easily in the environment, and they can accumulate in the bodies of living organisms, including humans. So this obviously, this accumulation, presents a potential health risk. So a lot of the products that these PFASs are in are stuff like pesticides, takeout containers, fast food wrappers, carpets, rugs, makeups, shampoo, leather, textile furnishings, and of course, the one big one that I think a lot of people know about is the Teflon frying pans, the non-stick coating Teflon frying pans. It's even in paint, and most commonly found in the firefighting foams to put out fires. So they've been manufactured since around the 1940s, but only within like the past 30 to 40 years have they been really used frequently. And I saw a quote by the University of San Francisco that said that PFAS are now ubiquitous in the population and environment. So even though there's only a few of these types of products that have the PFASs in them, they're still being found basically all over the place. And some of the most widely used food pesticides in the US are contaminated with these potentially dangerous levels of toxic PFASs. And I was hoping to get into that in a little bit. But multiple studies have established that crops actually absorb these pesticides, these PFASs, and they can be ingested by humans. So, that's pretty significant. Yet, most of the food in the U.S. That's grown conventionally have been sprayed with these pesticides that have the PFASs. But don't worry, guys. The FDA is here to save the day. Actually, no, they're not. They've only began monitoring the PFASs in food since 2019. And since then, they've detected them in fruits and vegetables. And as of right now, they haven't set any limits or protocol for their use. So, why doesn't somebody do something, right? Like, that's the question. Like, well, somebody is doing something. Maine has actually stepped up to the plate. And in a recent agreement, 3 different chemical companies, Chemours Company, the DuPont Incorporated Company, and Corteva Incorporated have all recently settled claims that they contaminated several U.S. public waterways with these PFASs. Of course, the companies deny the allegations, but they have ultimately been, they will ultimately pay a $1.1 billion fine as part of the settlement. And just to give you guys a little context, if you split that 3 ways, DuPont will only be paying around $300 million, and that's after they made $13 billion in 2022. So that's barely, a drop in the bucket. It's not much even of a slap on the wrist. So one of the aspects of this that seems the most significant is that there is, as of right now, no proper way to dispose of these PFASs in a way that's effective, efficient, and doesn't create a whole new host of problems. And because these PFASs are so widely used in industrial processes and added to literally thousands of consumer products, they've been found in our sewage systems at high levels. So, take a second to think about that. So the problem now becomes when the human waste is separated and filtered and treated, there's this byproduct that's loosely named sewer sludge. And I'm pretty sure that's not its scientific name, but this sewer sludge presents a problem because of the amount of the PFASs in the human waste. And there really hasn't been, as of right now, an effective way to destroy them properly. So when I was looking into this, I had to shake my head because years ago, this sewage sludge was just dumped into the ocean. Like they just threw it in the ocean, which of course caused numerous environmental problems such as dead zones. And as a fix, as a solution, the EPA decided about 30 years ago to approve this sewer sludge as a fertilizer. Right. So of course, it's not just the sewer sludge by itself. There was other compounds that had to be added in, but this presents problems of its own. And the fertilizer with the PFASs, still contains these toxic chemicals that end up in groundwater. They usually make their way into rivers, streams, and drinking water. And a little context here, when this was tested, the level of PFASs compounded in the sewage sludge fertilizers were 100,000 times higher than the level that the EPA considers safe in drinking water. So, as I mentioned, Maine is actually doing something. And even though I'm not usually a fan of bans, Maine last year became one of the first states to ban the practice of incorporating the sewage sludge as fertilizer, and is currently trying to find efficient ways to remove all the PFASs from the sewer sludge that often gets used as fertilizer. And in both Michigan and in Maine, they have found widespread contamination in the soil of every single field that they've checked where the sludge has been spread. And both states have started to order tainted farms to close. According to state officials, at least 49 farms in Maine were found to be contaminated. And as of right now, 4 farms have been shuttered completely for testing too hot. Maine is investigating about 1,100 sites where state records date back to the 70s, where this sludge was being spreaded around. And unfortunately, like most things with government, the investigation is just a slow process. And after a year, Maine has only tested about 182 sites, which is less than 20% of Maine's known sludge spreading locations. But of course, this creates a new challenge with this ban. It's how to effectively dispose of these PFASs thoroughly and effectively. A Boston University expert on PFAS issues and a sewage system engineer, Laura Orlando, has basically said that the difficulties eliminating these PFASs is a nightmare. And it's said that that's why you don't see facilities all over the place, these types of treatment facilities, because there's just really no way that they've found in a large scale to be able to dispose of them. Now, multiple studies have found that they can be eliminated in laboratory settings, but the real world successes aren't as easy, and they're in questions after several high level facilities couldn't provide satisfactory results. So, if we're talking about, the most responsible way to dispose of these PFASs, then, one of the solutions suggested was to burn them. But if we're going to burn them, it's going to create more air pollution and a whole new set of problems and concerns. And air pollution isn't largely regulated in the U.S. as of right now. So there's a long way to go, before there's a successful model of how to dispose of this. And a success, if there were to find a solution, it would be amazing, because this is kind of like a growing agricultural crisis. And as of right now, there's just no real clear direction as of how to filter and clean these PFASs and effectively in a way that would be scaled for the large amounts that would be necessary for the proper disposal. So I actually found a story that I wanted to share with you guys about a 4th generation family farm that recently had to close in Maine because of these PFASs. And the story was originally from the Portland Press Herald, and it highlights exactly why so many farms are disappearing, not only in the US, but around the globe. And in fact, I actually just saw a headline of a study recently that showed around the world that farms are on the decline. And of course, there's multiple reasons for that. But so yeah, I want to get into this this family farm story here. So the farm was called the family that owned it was called the Dosty. It's called the Dosty family farm. And as of 3 years ago, the dairy farm was thriving. It recently had changed hands in the family. I think the grandpa had sold it to his son. And in October of 2020, the buyer of the family's milk from the dairy told them that it was contaminated with the PFASs. And of course, it ended up flipping their lives upside down, because their land is one of at least 49 in Maine that have been contaminated by these PFASs from the sewer sludge used to fertilize the agricultural fields. And a lot of times these family farms don't have the money to do the testing for these PFASs because they're just super expensive, like hundreds of thousands of dollars. So most farms don't test for it, but the state can anytime they want. And so when the Dostie Family Farms neighbor tested positive for these PFASs. Stonyfield Farms, the people who were buying their milk, tested it, and when it came back hot, the state ordered them basically to dump all their milk, which was their only source of income. And after that, they tried to do everything to fix the problem. They installed like a $40,000 water filter. They had to buy feed to replace all the contaminated hay that couldn't grow on their tainted fields. And that still wasn't enough because organic, the laws requiring the standards for organic dairy farms requires that they put their cows out to pasture where they could, quote, lead healthier lives. And so that, they hunted for workarounds, trying to find like how they could get, they were even considering moving their milk barn or even trucking the cows back and forth to fields that weren't contaminated to graze. But yeah, it's just not cost effective, right? Like that's going to be ridiculously expensive. And so without this organic certification, their milk couldn't be sold for the high prices that they need to sell, to pay down this family farm debt that they've been accruing. And so within 11 months, basically, they weren't able to produce any product. They had no income at all coming in. Eventually, they had to auction off the last of their herd to pay down their debt. And it's stories like this that break my heart, because not only do we need these family farms and small farms that aren't controlled by, these big monopolies like big beef and stuff, but like this farm was the family's purpose, right? Like now they don't know what they're going to do, what kind of career they're going to get into. I mean, they've had to resort to finding other jobs like trucking, but this is all because of government, and it turns out the previous owner of the Dostie farm decades ago had spread this PFAS tainted sludge as a fertilizer on the farm fields back when the Maine Department of Environmental Protection was telling farmers it was safe. So this is all due because of government. And as of right now, the state is investigating about 1,100 sites where state records date back to the 70s. So I guess the question becomes like, did they know? Did these chemical companies know? And I actually was able to dig up some research about that as well. So in 1959, DuPont scientists actually found that PFASs enlarged lab rats' livers and likely caused birth defects in workers. But still, the company told its employees that were working with the substance that the compounds are about as toxic as table salt. And between 1961 and 2006, there were dozens of instances where DuPont or 3M scientists discovered or acknowledged that PFAS's toxicity internally, but they didn't publish the findings or report them to the EPA, which is required under law. And God, there's so much here. Like around that same time, a DuPont worker died from PFAS inhalation, which the company on multiple occasions dismissed as a rumor. And in the 80s, again, DuPont found elevated liver enzymes in 60% of workers tested. And a confidential internal report detailed birth defects among plant employees, pregnant plant employees. And there has just been a whole bunch of kind of cover up regarding this. And I guess I'll end with this. The one that was probably the most significant that really kind of shows the kind of backdoor dealings with this is that as these, the media and public scrutiny started to increase in the 2000s, DuPont's vice president at the time, Susan Stallnecker, wrote an email to the EPA in 2006 with a subject line, urgent EPA action needed, saying basically saying that we need the EPA to quickly, like first thing tomorrow, say the following: 1, that consumer products sold under Teflon brand are safe, and 2, further to date, there are no human health effects known to be caused by PFOA, which is a type of PFAS. So, I think it's clear here, and I'm sure we're going to get into this more, that there's a lot of collusion going on with government. Not only does government cover it up, but government also sometimes is the exact reason why, like this family farm, this Dostie family farm, why this is actually happening, why these farms are closing. And of course, the incentives that government has through backdoor deals, through lobbying, as of right now, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of hope for government solutions. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there. And maybe at the end, we could talk about what's being done and how to avoid these. But for now, I will hand it over to Matt to talk about an equally disturbing chemical compound. But unlike the PFASs, this compound, which is fluoride, has a dark history, but has been hailed as a beneficial health product. So go for it, Matty.
Yeah, for sure. Full disclosure, I feel like I'm having that dream where I'm taking a test in college and I didn't study for it. I mean, we, like Jason said, these guests that we're supposed to have on today just no-showed us. So we kind of, put this together last minute. And so I certainly don't have a presentation as well as what Jason just put forward. But like Jason said earlier, I have been studying and researching fluoride use since well before the Free Thought Project. That's kind of like what kind of helped shake me out of my stupor. When I realized that we were being mass drugged, against our will from the government, putting chemicals, like very dangerous chemicals, in the water supply, that kind of helped, wake me up a little bit. And but if you say it like that, you're a kook or a conspiracy theorist, right? It's not okay to talk about being mass drugged again, without your consent by the U.S. government. And when I say U.S. government, it really is just the U.S. government. So if we look at the history of fluoride, the United States health authorities like the FDA, EPA, they call it, quote, one of the top 10 public health achievements of the 20th century, right? And this is, for those that don't know, fluoride is a byproduct of the phosphate industry, which is like aluminum smelting and the production of fertilizers. So these companies, prior to dumping it in our water supply, had to pay to dispose of it because it's a highly toxic chemical. Like it's known from everything from endocrine disruption to cancer to a whole host of IQ and then mental ailments. So it's the list is vast on what it causes, and that's why it's so, they have to pay to get rid of it. But instead, they don't have to. Instead of paying to get rid of it, they actually get paid U.S. taxpayer dollars to package this shit and then dump it in our water supplies. And that happens to roughly 3/4 of the entire country. Like roughly 75% of all municipal water supplies in this country are fluoridated. And when the effects of that, that's pretty fucking chilling, And when I say the United States earlier, right? The United States is one of the sole countries in the world that puts fluoride in the water. Literally no other countries. Maybe I think it's 97% of the rest of the world does not add fluoride to their water supply because it's fucking stupid. And we supposedly follow the science, right? But even the World Health Organization, they say that there's no discernible difference in tooth decay, if you add fluoride or not. But there is a whole host of information and scientific studies showing the negative effects it has on IQ, right? And but if you go to PolitiFact or if you go to any of these other fact-checking websites, they're going to tell you that's not the case. When there's at least a dozen studies out of Harvard that show this is the case, right? There's been, as of this year recently, there's been exactly 85 studies on the relationship between fluoride and human intelligence. And 76 of those found detrimental effects on human IQs. And it's, and these are extensive studies. And this is comparing, fluoridation to non-fluoridation, right? So the people that are receiving the fluoridated water are clearly dumber. And that's a scary thing. But if you talk about that again, you are a conspiracy theorist. And Derek Brose recently came out with an article that he covered the Fluoride Action Network's findings, their Freedom of Information Act requests. And it shows that these people know that fluoride is bad for you, and they're actively covering up that information. And one of the most recent public records requests was done in California by Fluoride Action Network, and it showed these emails came from the California State Dental Director, Dr. Jayanth Kumar. And what's in these emails is absolutely bone chilling, right? Kumar is a fluoride activist. He wants everybody on fluoride. He denies this entire body of science that shows that fluoride exposure can lead to lower IQ in children. And he was tasked with putting out a study to show that, right? Like, so he was going to do this, where they look at a big analysis of studies, like a meta-analysis of all these other studies. And then they publish their cherry-picked science to show that fluoride doesn't reduce IQ in children. And so he can commission this study, and prior to commissioning it, he told the people, like these emails were recently discovered. He told the people conducting the studies that he has a desire to protect fluoridation influence, right? He wants to show, this is what they set out to do in this meta-analysis, is show that fluoridated water is safe, right? He preempted the study with his desired results, and which is not a study at all, right? That's propaganda. When you come to this, when you propose a hypothesis and then you try to prove it wrong, you don't set out to make a point in a study, because that's not science. That's the opposite of science. It's propaganda. And so Kumar commissioned this study several years ago, and he had to publish it, or he tried to get it published 4 different times, and every time it got rejected because it did not show, like they couldn't show that fluoride didn't have negative health consequences in regards to IQ. They could not show that, so it got kicked back multiple times. And now we know, like these people are actively trying to cover it up, right? It's mind blowing, right? And if that doesn't like shock you, you know, the negative effects of the IQ on our offspring, right? Like, you could look at the effects of it on the actual environment, right? If you like that, there's a whole bunch of fluoride dumped into the water supply every year, right? The rule of thumb is that there's around 130 lethal doses of fluoride dumped into water supply per person annually. And what's a lethal dose for a child? It's 200 milligrams. And it's already been documented that 1.2 grams of sodium fluoride kills people, and people have died from ingesting 1.2 kilograms of fluoride. So it's like a big scam to throw away their trash from the phosphate industries, right? So like roughly the municipalities produce around 400 liters per person per day in America for drinking water or water on tap, right? And so humans only can ingest about 1 liter, right, of water on average per day. So that leaves 399 liters to go for baths, watering lawns, washing cars, flushing toilets, whatever, putting out fires, all this other shit. And all of that water has fluoride in it, right? So this is a sneaky way that the phosphate industry is actually just spraying their toxic waste back out into the environment, right? So if we look at the fluoridation rate, which is averages of 1 part per million or 1 milligram per liter, that's the target dose of this medicine, you know, for humans in the United States who are being drugged without consent. So therefore, like every 400 liters of water supplied to each citizen is full of 400 milligrams of fluoride. And since only 1 milligram of that is swallowed, the 399 milligrams of excess fluoride literally gets flushed down a sewer, sprayed out into lawns, and it's fully legal toxic waste dumping, right? And if you look at the numbers, if you just do some simple math, right, you get 140 grams of fluoride per person each year. That's 140 grams gives us our rule of thumb, you know, of 130 lethal doses of fluoride per person per year dumped into the environment. So you multiply 130 times, you know, 150 million people. I know there's more people in the United States, but that's the current fluoridated drinking supplies. Around 150 million people. That makes 20 billion lethal doses of fluoride per year dumped into our environment. That's over 10 million tons of this shit that's spread across yards, dumped down toilets, bathed in, showers, pools, all that. 10 million tons of toxic waste that these people would have to pay to dispose of, but instead is being added to our fucking drinking water, man. It is absolutely insane. Luckily, I've been an activist for this for a long time. I've actually gone to local government, and we've gotten it pushed out of our municipalities down here. So my town is not fluoridated, and but like a large group of dentists and all, we like helped put an end to that years ago. But I highly suggest to everybody to go to their local governments, because they're not going to do this at a federal level, right? Because the feds claim this as one of the top 10 public health achievements in the 20th century, and they're probably not willing to reverse that stance anytime soon. But you can totally get, you go present these facts to local government and such. And the Fluoride Action Network is a great wealth of knowledge. It's made up it's kind of like A&E for 9/11 Truth, where there's a bunch of architects and engineers who get together to point out 9/11 Truth. The Fluoride Action Network is that, but with scientists and doctors who, and PhDs and and dentists who have come forward and gathered all this evidence. And they have like toolkits and shit. You can go and there's like literally one of the toolkits is called Steps to End Fluoridation in Your Community. So you could do this. You start local. And I mean, I'm living proof, we did it down here. So I highly suggest you do the same thing. I mean, this is mass poisoning of the American population and the rest of the world. Like, just to prove like the rest of the world does not do this. We're one of the only countries in the world that does this, and it's known toxic. There's thousands of pages of studies that show the toxicity, and those who deny that are literally denying the science, and they're the ones that are the quacks, and they're the ones that that should be exposed, not the people that have been reporting on this and doing this research for decades and trying to save humanity. But that's about all I got, because I didn't study for this test last night. But
yeah, that was great, man. And all we have to really do, if we're going to compare, these government agencies to activist organizations, just look at their incentives, right? Like, what incentives do these activist organizations like the Fluoride Action Network have? Like, their incentive is to try to promote
spread disinformation.
And what do they get from that, right? So we always have to kind of keep that in the back of our mind. And of course, I would also mention, guys, like, definitely be filtering your water, even be filtering your shower water. I know there's like Berkey filters that you could put on your shower so you're not getting sprayed down with all that stuff.
Yeah, that's one thing I wanted to point out. Sorry to interrupt, but in regard to fluoride filtration, there is no filter that takes out fluoride. You can't filter it out with a standard carbon filter. The only way to remove fluoride is like through reverse osmosis, or like a steam method where you would boil water and then let it collect on some kind of dripping apparatus and drip down. But there's boiling water does not get rid of fluoride. You have to collect the steam, because the steam doesn't rise. Boiling water only concentrates the fluoride. So technically, if you just kept adding gallons of water into a boiling pot and kept doing that, you could distill the fluoride down and see how fucking nasty that is. And you can actually see it if your city fluoridates a lot. You can actually see the film that comes from that 1 milligram per liter that is in your drinking water. It's pretty disgusting.
Last but not least, here's a clip from the one and only Johnny Vedmore.
Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Now, can anybody tell me, on a scale of 0 to pasty, how much pasty was involved in this supposed Russian coup? They marched, did they? We've been being told. Look at this. Wagner troops are marching. They're marching and taking over Russia. There's going to be a civil war. That's what we've been told. Now, many people have been saying, or at least my side of the fence been saying, bullshit. Bullshit. We call bullshit on this. This is all just Western propaganda. Now let's see what it is. How much bullshit involved? Did the Wagner troops led by a guy who looks like he's potentially going to have sex with a donkey, did they truly almost bring down Vladimir Putin and the Russian Federation?
Watching the events in the past few days, I mean over the weekend and today, and what was the end of the whole story, it is quite clear that that was simply a demonstration. He never had any intention to march on Moscow that was announced. And
what? So wait 1 second. You're telling me that he had no intention to march on Moscow, even though we've been told over and over again that this is civil war. Putin's. And did you believe it? Did you believe it this time? Did you? Did you fall for it again? Are you like that? Are you a pasty? Tell me. Are you human? Or do you have the heart of a pasty?
To start the rebellion or mutiny, I would have to change the government to come to Moscow, because that was from the very beginning. One should understand that was quite senseless. But what he wanted to show is quite certainly to show that he is a man at least equal to the defense minister, to other generals, and he has his right to decide on many things, and specifically on how the money should be distributed in this game. And that.
Do you think, now that he has done this act and tried to make Putin look bad and given the West a load of propaganda crap for a week so they could be like, oh look, Russia's about to fall, it's a hereditary coup, Putin's gonna fall, Putin's gonna fall, Putin's gonna fall. All crap. Do you think now he's going to be rewarded and he's going to get the money that he wants?
That was the whole story. So it was not to take Moscow, not to show anything, because from the very beginning he declared that he is...
Because that's pasties. They're actually firing pasties out of this now. This is for pasty mortar.
He still demonstrated that
that mortar has a pasty in. Look, they're looking at pictures of pasty.
He made the demonstration.
So when he says we didn't march to overthrow Russia's leadership, you think that's correct, do you?
So he's saying it. So when he says the thing he's saying, you think that's correct, and he wasn't trying to overthrow Russian leadership, even though that's what we've reported as the mainstream news. We've all reported that he's going to overthrow Russian leadership because it suits our narrative, and then people are like, "Oh God, drama," and they stop questioning whether the walking CBDC Richie Sunak should remain in power, or whether Boris Johnson's pasty party mingle jingle wank is anything to even bother looking at.
You don't think he's just trying to save face?
No, to my mind, this is absolutely correct. This is absolutely correct, and one should believe him.
Look, they've blanked it out there, because there you see a penis coming out of his arm, obviously.
Actually,
how significant do you think, though, it was that Prigozhin not only moved into and apparently seized control of one...
He's still saying seize control. He's saying it was a protest. A protest doesn't seize control, so he didn't seize control. He just marched in a protest. So she's already changing it back. She's just been told, and she's saying, but isn't it like...
Fairly sizable city, but also did so openly criticizing the way that President Putin and his leading commanders have conducted the war in Ukraine.
Who even knows? At the moment, who knows whose PSYOP this is? Is this Russian PSYOP or American PSYOP? Is this a way to show that Russia is fair, or is this a way for America to influence Russia? I think that he's going to end up getting his head chopped off.
First of all, we should actually realize why he came to Rostov. And he came to Rostov, I don't think too many people know that at that time, Minister Shoigu and General Gerasimov were both in Rostov within the southern military district. And that's why he actually came.
So what this guy is telling you here is he's telling you two military commanders who were vital in the Ukrainian conflict were in Rostov, and that this terrible, I'm going to overthrow you, anti-Putin general marched in in a protest to meet them and talk to them. Not to take over the country, not to kill Putin, not to do anything like that, just to talk to him. And look at what the Americans made it into.
Into Rostov to talk to them and to show them to show him his power and to demonstrate to show the meeting. And they disappeared immediately. Shoigu, as far as I know, left on his helicopter in some direction, unknown direction, and Gerasimov was hiding somewhere in the safe house. So after staying some time in Rostov, he just again made a gesture of going to all his activities. Although during those days are important.
So, wait a minute. He goes to Rostov to meet these two generals, and the two generals, one of them scarpers and the other one locks himself in the safe house, and no one wants to meet him because obviously he's doing the American bloody job for them. He's doing the CIA's job for them, isn't he?
And not important because they showed any sort of a support for a mutiny or a rebellion against Putin in this country. But they are important because they demonstrated that Kremlin has been shaken after those events. Putin does not have any control over the situation.
He obviously has massive control over the situation. It's just a protest can happen. That's a little awkward. Protests happen in the West all the time. Against war, against other things, against sanctions that happened. We don't have this sort of thing where we say, oh, it's about to be a coup, they're protesting.
The army is in extremely poor condition, that a lot of people secretly oppose Putin's politics and support those who try to rebel.
What do you think they're going to say on Western media? Of course, they're going to say that people want to rebel and they don't like Putin. Of course, they're going to say, they keep saying it because they want to will it into existence. Whether it's true or not is another thing. There's probably loads of Russians who support him and loads of Russians who don't. So what? What the reality is he's in power. He's been in power for all of this time.
Or what they think that try to rebel against the war, do not support the war itself, and many other things.
I just want to stop you there because you said so many important things there. You are saying that...
Look at these back shots they got of people with their arms and legs lost. They lost in war. And why have they lost in war? Because the Ukrainians have been forced into a Western-allied war against Russia. This is all their missing limbs, and they're going to end up... Oh, no one's going to have any limbs, and they'll be flopping around like pasties.
When Prigozhin took his troops into Rostov-on-Don and apparently had tanks there in the streets in control of the city, he'd only gone there to talk to Shoigu and Gerasimov, who are the leading military figures when it comes to the war in Ukraine.
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. To my mind, as far as I know from my sources, that was the only aim of his coming to Rostov.
So that's the only aim. That is the only aim. There is no other aim. But what have you been watching on your TV screens? What have you been listening to? You've been listening to news reporting lies to you that there's a Russian coup. Now, what good does it tell you that? Telling you're not even on the Russian side. What good does it do you? Well, it makes you think that Russia's about to fall. That Putin's about to lose his pace, and so that means that you should keep fighting. So it tries to encourage the public to support the continuation of war by saying, look, we're so close to the end and he could fall at any time. But it's a lie. They're lying to you. They're treating you like a pasty. That's what they do. That's what they do. They take you, they fill you full of meat, and they cook you in the oven.
And when he realized that he would not be able to get them, he told everybody, and he announced that he is now marching on Moscow. It's just to demonstrate.
Let me ask you then.
Just to demonstrate, yet not reported as that. Everyone's gone over the top, and there's no point in even giving it any air when it's like that. You just leave it. Wait till this moment where it all turns out to be balls, and they have to admit it. And it only takes a week nowadays. They say all this bull, and this is propaganda to change your mind. It's not propaganda to change Russia's mind. This shit isn't played in Russia. Russians aren't watching this. This isn't changing any Russian mind. This is to change Western minds. This is to stick the pasty in your mind, to hypnotize you into the thought that they're just about to win and Putin's under the cosh and you should keep supporting it. And this is the media. The media now say, what? What? This wasn't true. And they were reporting it the entire time from zero information, because if they had listened to it, they would have heard that he's demonstrating.
You said that this shows that a lot of people secretly in Russia do not support the way that President Putin is ruling, and in particular the war in Ukraine. Do you think that the actions of Prigozhin, this rather audacious...
Prigozhin is just a bloody tool, isn't he? He's just a tool. Listen, I mean, if he's Western aligned, he's not going to last very long, is he? He's made a really big mistake. But likelihood is he thinks he's a big knob in Russia, and this is all a little bit of a game. Pardon me. Whether it's a game that works or not, who knows? For the time being, we're going to watch these shots of people who have obviously lost limbs in a war that is as fake as the news of all the rest. So people are getting missile bombed and all of this, yes. But is the war actually a real war, or is it perpetual war, limited warfare? Because it's a limited warfare. It's limited. It's limited. That's why it doesn't advance. And what was the criticism? We don't advance. He said in one thing, we could go 800 miles. I could push him 800 miles. So you go 800 kilometers, you could just take over nearly the whole of Ukraine in 3 days, 4 days. That's it. I'd take over Ukraine. It's pie in the sky sort of stuff. But that's not what is happening anyway. It's Kissinger's war. Putin is still fighting in Kissinger's war. They agreed to it. They have to.
Criticism and the march, which was seen as a direct challenge to Putin's authority at the time. Do you think that will encourage more dissent within the country?
This guy, the way he dances is pretty good. I move my pasty in and I move my pasty out. I put my pasty in, out. Eventually, you'll have robot legs. He'll chase you down and kill you within minutes.
Even though, of course, there are huge risks in doing so in Russia.
Well, I do not actually think so. I was watching the
he's wondering when he's going to get pasty
and seeing plenty of people just celebrating and greetings the army, greetings the Prigozhin's tanks, and bringing them piroshki and other things, and obviously openly supporting him. But what's going to happen next, we all know very well. A lot of figures who announced their support for Prigozhin have already been arrested.
This is obvious. This is obvious. This is how they make these counter figures, these figures that create this counter narrative in the Western idealized story. This old, good for nothing guy walks in, a load of people celebrate, and then they quickly run away again. Everyone runs away. He gets arrested. All the people around him gets arrested. Putin, bad man. But of course, this guy's done the CIA's work for them in Russia. That's insane. That's insane. If I was Putin, I would stomp this guy into the ground like he was nothing more than a rogue pasty.
Those who are seen in the footage will definitely be arrested in the next few days. People might secretly be increasing their feeling against the war, but they will not demonstrate anything, and they will not dare to go on the streets to show anything, because this is really very, very dangerous today. And everybody, believe me, everybody, including Prigozhin, will be very severely punished.
So there you go. You want to play the CIA game? You want to play the Western game? You're going to end up getting punished by Putin, bro. Because Putin ain't going to take that. Is these guys mad? They're not even going to take over. They're not planning to take over the country. It's all propaganda stuff. He's willing. He's not even. He's willing to serve a life sentence or to be offed by the FSB or someone else to make a stance and have a march and a pretense. It's not even for trying, because there's no way Putin's going to be overthrown, however much they're having a wet dream about it. It's just not going to happen. They can convince you it's almost going to happen, but then the truth is all of these guys are going to get it in the ass now. They've been part of a very big propaganda effort, an effort that the king of propaganda, Lenin himself, would have been completely and utterly down with. But it's going to see them dead.
But Prigozhin, as we understand it, has gone to Belarus. I mean, what do you make of that deal there with President Lukashenko?
Another interesting thing that became known to me right now when I was thinking about the situation is that there were actually two people who took part in the negotiations. And this is quite interesting because one person was Lukashenko, as we all know, and another person was Patrushev, chairman of the National Security Council and the former head of the FSB, and a very, very influential figure in Russia.
In Russia, this is, rather than in Belarus.
Well, I mean, this itself is very interesting. The Belarus, I mean, Lukashenko was chosen because for Putin, he's the man who can negotiate. But there was no sense to negotiate with Prigozhin, actually, because they simply explain to him what's going to happen to him and what happens to his money already.
So there's no point in negotiating with Prigozhin because he's going to get whopped. What's the point in negotiating with a dead man who's now going to be penniless? Why was he doing it? To get into Russian history, to cause something, to work for some people who probably told him it'd be good for his career. But he looked like an inane, stupid, fat man sitting there going, "No, I'm going to take over Russia," and pretending. And that's what then the CIA-aligned MSM, Western MSM, ran with it like it was a wet dream. They wanted it so badly, and these guys are going to get it in the ass now. They're going to get all the pasty, nothing but pasty. They'll look around, they'll look left, they'll look right, they'll see pasty.
So where do you think this leaves Prigozhin and the Wagner Group, which he heads? They were, of course, playing a hugely significant role in parts of the front line in Ukraine around Bakhmut.
Wow, what happens now to Prigozhin? He just answered that. He's going to be deeply punished. What happened to the Wagner Group? It will be stripped of its commanders, and they will end up in gulag-type situations. When does this happen again? Never, you idiots, because the people who did this must have been completely and utterly retarded to think they were going to do it and then have an easy life.
And so on. I mean, are those forces going to still be fighting in Ukraine?
Look at them showing Ukrainian showers.
Do you think those Russian soldiers who are left there on the front line will still want to do it?
I'm pretty convinced that that's the end of the Wagner Group. And, of course, this is very good for Ukraine because there were...
So that's the end of the Wagner Group, he says. He says that's the end. So Wagner Group are going to take over. They're going to take over Russia. I've been watching pasty after pasty, channel after channel, telling me, Wagner Group are going to take over Russia. Wagner Group, Wagner. This is the end of the Wagner Group. I think this guy's got it right.
Really quite a formidable force. Which were fighting.
The guys who are about to fire the gun there are firing on Kiev, and they don't realize it.
Prigozhin, I'm afraid he should take great care of his life, but that will not last long. He will not last long. We are talking about probably days, maximum weeks, and he'll be over.
He's saying he'll be over. He's not saying he'll be retired. He'll be jailed. He'll be saying his life, it won't last long. It'll last days, maybe weeks, and he'll be over. Yeah, it'll be over. It'll be over. He's played the Western game. He's played the Western game. And people in the West supped it up and believed that this could possibly be true. Who does that benefit? Think about it. Think about your own positivity, your own belief that this was about to happen. Even I looked at it, the first time I saw that there was some form of coup, I looked at it, I was like, oh my God, it's some form of coup. Maybe this is true this time. I know it's not been true any other time, but maybe it's true this time. Maybe it's true. Maybe I should check. Maybe I should. Oh, it's bullshit. Everybody's saying it's true. Everybody believes it's true. I go talk to everybody. Everybody believes it's true. But it's bullshit. It's bullshit. This happens every time. But even I at the start go, could this be true?
The soldiers here, the Wagner Group, will not anymore. None of them will remain on the front line, and they would be dealt with personally, everybody of them.
Every one of them will be dealt with personally. The Wagner Group is over.
Sure about.
So just finally then, some commentators have seen the events of the last few days as the beginning of the end of President Putin. You seem to be suggesting that although it has shown...
There you go. Some commentators, lots of commentators, most commentators have seen it from the beginning to the end for Putin. And you're saying that it's not the beginning to the end for Putin, that actually Putin's fine and the Wagner Group and all of this stuff has been nonsense. Is that what you're saying?
His weaknesses, he's simply going to strengthen his grip on power.
I think so, yes. He indeed demonstrated terrible...
What? Putin? Vladimir Putin is going to strengthen his grip on power. Vladimir Putin, since when has Vladimir Putin ever strengthened his grip on power? Let's check. Shall we check 1999? Actually, let's go back to 1991, 1989, 1988. Even back then, every year, he has strengthened his grip on power. I know people will say he wasn't in power then, but he was. He was KGB. Important as well, in between East Germany and West Germany, slipping between the war and punishing people. High actors, scaring the hell out of people. Every year he increased his grip of power. The people who talk about him through the 90s, before he becomes president, before Yeltsin points at him and says, he's your next president. Before that, people were scared, very scared of Vladimir Putin. He was like a ghost. And he rose, his rise, just constant power, until he was the most powerful person, and he's remained in power. And you think now that fat bloke from the Wagner Group could possibly bring down this guy? Really, this guy, this master chess player, this four-dimensional chess player, you think this tubby bloke who looks like he's like eating all of the foie gras and no one else is getting foie gras at all, that he is the pasty muncher extraordinaire? You think he's going to take control? I think you're a pasty if you think that.
He left the...
I'm sorry, I called you a pasty.
Together with Medvedev, there were a lot of private jets going from Moscow airport.
We can get in the little van very quickly,
including
and then we can sit in the little van.
This is true, but I think he will come back. Came back already, actually, and his grip on power will be strengthened. I'm pretty sure about it. We shall see the next day things that we do not know and that we cannot decide today. That's important because it's important.
Okay, things we cannot know and things we cannot decide today. Whether I will eat ganache tomorrow. There you go.
What forces were on the side of the opposition to Putin, and if those forces were strong enough to have their word, that will be shown in the next few days. But at the moment, or at least in the next few days, Putin will definitely strengthen his grip on power.
Of course, Putin will definitely strengthen his grip on power. It is insane. These guys, oh man, I tell you, in Russia, lots of people are going to get tortured tonight, baby. Lots of people are going to get tortured tonight. What have they done? Unbelievable. Wagner Group, potentially some of the stupidest people who have ever lived. And it's not going to end well for them. Just not going to end well. I can tell you. Just not going to end well.
Young generation, like Prime Minister Trudeau, President of Argentina, and so on, certainly penetrates the cabinets.
Thanks again for tuning into another episode of the Independent Review. We will see you next week.